Leo loved to paint. He painted sunshine yellow sunflowers reaching for the sky, playful puppies chasing butterflies, and sparkling blue oceans filled with happy dolphins. He painted everything he saw, everything he felt. The problem was, nobody seemed to want to buy his paintings. His small apartment, usually bursting with color from his canvases, felt a little dimmer each day. Empty pizza boxes stacked in the corner were a testament to his dwindling funds. Leo was kind, always smiling, and tried to stay optimistic. Maybe tomorrow, he'd tell himself, dipping his brush into a vibrant shade of orange. Tomorrow, someone will see the magic in my paintings. But tomorrow often turned into another tomorrow, and another, filled with polite smiles and gentle rejections at art fairs. People would admire his work, compliment his talent, but then walk away empty-handed. He started to feel a little like one of his own paintings, hanging on a wall, admired but ultimately unwanted. Discouragement began to creep into his heart, a dull gray cloud threatening to eclipse his sunny disposition. He still painted, of course. He couldn't stop. It was like breathing. But the joy was fading, replaced by a nagging worry. How much longer could he keep going? How much longer before he had to give up his dream? The thought made his brush tremble slightly as he mixed his colors, a tiny tremor of despair in a sea of vibrant hues. He needed a break, something different. Maybe a change of scenery would help. The "Help Wanted" ad was tucked away on a dusty bulletin board in the corner of the local grocery store, almost hidden behind flyers for lost kittens and piano lessons. Leo nearly missed it. Scrawled in faded ink on a small piece of yellowed paper were the words, "Caretaker needed. Edge of town. Room and board provided." No phone number, just an address. Leo hesitated. Being a caretaker wasn't exactly his dream. He imagined scrubbing floors and mowing lawns, things far removed from the colorful world of his paintings. But his dwindling bank account screamed louder than his artistic aspirations. He was almost out of paint, and the thought of not being able to create terrified him more than any amount of housework. The address listed was for a place on the very edge of town, a place he'd only ever glimpsed from the bus window. It was rumored to be the home of a reclusive old woman, a widow who wanted nothing to do with the rest of the world. The thought of living with a grumpy recluse made him even more hesitant. He weighed his options. Starve and continue painting, or take a chance on the unknown and at least have a roof over his head. The choice, though difficult, was clear. With a sigh, Leo ripped the ad from the bulletin board. He carefully folded it and tucked it into his pocket, a small, slightly crumpled symbol of hope and uncertainty. He might be a lost artist, but maybe, just maybe, this was the path to finding a new home. The bus rattled to a stop at the edge of town, leaving Leo standing on a dusty road with his small backpack and a heart full of apprehension. The address on the crumpled ad led him down a long, winding driveway, overgrown with weeds and lined with drooping trees. The house at the end was even more dilapidated than he'd imagined. Paint peeled from the wooden siding like sunburnt skin, and the porch sagged under the weight of neglect. He hesitated before knocking on the heavy, wooden door. It creaked open a crack, revealing a sliver of a face framed by gray hair. "Yes," a voice rasped, sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Hello," Leo said, trying to sound cheerful despite the gloomy surroundings. "I saw your ad for a caretaker." The door opened wider, revealing Mrs. Gable in her entirety. She was small and wiry, with eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. Her face was etched with wrinkles, each one telling a story of a life lived mostly in solitude. She wore a faded, floral dress that hung loosely on her frame. "So you're the artist," she said, her voice laced with skepticism. "I suppose you think you're going to paint your way out of chores." Leo swallowed hard. "No, ma'am," he replied. "I'm here to work. I'm good at taking care of things." Mrs. Gable studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "All right," she finally said. "Come in. But don't expect any sunshine and rainbows here. This is a house of hard work and quiet. And I expect both. With that, she turned and shuffled back into the dimly lit hallway, leaving Leo to follow, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. This was going to be harder than he thought. Mrs. Gable wasted no time putting Leo to work. The garden's a mess, she declared, pointing to a patch of overgrown weeds that had once been a flower bed. Start there. Leo, armed with a rusty shovel and a pair of gardening gloves that were several sizes too big, set to work with his usual enthusiasm. Unfortunately, enthusiasm didn't translate into gardening skills. He accidentally pulled up a prize-winning rose bush, mistaking it for a weed. Mrs. Gable, watching from the window, let out a sharp gasp that sounded like a deflating balloon. Later, while attempting to sweep the porch, he managed to knock over a stack of old flower pots, sending them crashing to the ground. The sound echoed through the quiet house, and Mrs. Gable appeared at the door, her face a mask of disapproval. Clumsy, she muttered, shaking her head. Despite his mishaps, Leo remained polite and helpful. He apologized profusely for the rose bush and the flower pots, offering to replant the one and clean up the other. He tried his best to follow Mrs. Gable's instructions, even when they were delivered in a gruff and impatient tone. He knew he wasn't a natural caretaker, but he was determined to prove himself. He imagined his sunflowers, his puppies, his oceans. He would paint again, but first, he had to earn his keep. He had to show Mrs. Gable that he was more than just a clumsy artist. He was a hard worker, and he wouldn't give up, even if it meant facing her grumpy disapproval at every turn. He just hoped he didn't break anything else before dinner. After a dinner of surprisingly delicious, if silently consumed, vegetable soup, Mrs. Gable assigned Leo another task, cleaning out the attic. "It's full of junk," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Get rid of anything that's not nailed down." The attic was dark and dusty, illuminated only by a single, bare bulb hanging from the rafters. Cobwebs clung to everything, and the air was thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. Leo coughed as he began to sort through the piles of discarded furniture, moth-eaten clothes, and broken toys. In a far corner, almost hidden beneath a pile of old blankets, he found a large, wooden box. It was covered in dust and grime, but he could just make out the faint outline of a painted flower on the lid. Curiosity piqued, he carefully lifted the box and carried it to the center of the attic. He brushed away the dust and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst faded velvet lining, were tubes of oil paint, brushes of various sizes, and several blank canvases. His heart skipped a beat. It was a painter's kit, old but clearly well-loved. He carefully lifted out a canvas, its surface smooth and inviting. An old palette knife was there too, covered in dried paint. He could almost feel the energy humming from the box. After carefully closing the box, Leo went downstairs and found Mrs. Gable in the living room, knitting by the dim light of a table lamp. "Mrs. Gable," he asked, holding up the box. "I found this in the attic." "What is it?" His eyes shone with a hopeful light, a spark rekindled by the unexpected discovery. Mrs. Gable looked up from her knitting, her eyes narrowing as she recognized the box in Leo's hands. A flicker of something, sadness, perhaps, or regret, crossed her face before she quickly masked it with her usual stern expression. "That's, old things," she said, her voice softer than before. "Belonged to me. A long time ago." "You painted?" Leo asked, his voice filled with surprise and genuine interest. "These are wonderful. Why did you stop?" Mrs. Gable sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "After my husband passed," she said, her gaze drifting towards the darkened window, the joy went out of it. "It just didn't seem worth it anymore. Painting was something we did together, shared. Without him." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Leo stood silently for a moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. He knew what it was like to lose the joy in something you loved. He hadn't lost a person, but he had lost the feeling that his art mattered. "I'm sorry," he said softly. I understand. Mrs. Gable shook her head slightly, as if dismissing the sentiment. Don't be. It was a long time ago. Just put the box back in the attic. It's better forgotten. But Leo couldn't forget. He saw a spark of something in Mrs. Gable's eyes, a flicker of the artist she once was. He knew that buried beneath her grumpy exterior was a woman who had loved to create, to express herself through color and form. And he had a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he could help her find that joy again. He carefully set the box down. Maybe, he said gently, maybe not everything is better forgotten. Leo returned the box to the attic, but he couldn't shake the image of those paints and canvases from his mind. After finishing his chores each day, he would sneak back up to the attic and carefully take out a few supplies. He still had a little bit of his own paint left, and he found a small, unused canvas in Mrs. Gable's box. He set up an easel in his small room, near the window that overlooked the overgrown garden. The scenery around Mrs. Gable's house was surprisingly beautiful. The drooping trees had a certain charm, and the weeds were filled with colorful wildflowers he'd never seen before. Even the dilapidated barn in the distance seemed to have a story to tell. Inspired, Leo began to paint. He painted the wildflowers, their vibrant colors bursting against the muted greens of the weeds. He painted the barn, capturing its weathered wood and the way the sunlight streamed through its cracks. He painted the drooping trees, giving them a sense of grace and resilience. He lost himself in his art, forgetting his worries and his past failures. He was simply Leo, the artist, creating something beautiful from the world around him. Unbeknownst to Leo, Mrs. Gable often found herself drawn to his closed door. She would stand in the hallway, listening to the soft scratch of his brush against the canvas. Sometimes, she would peek through the crack in the door, watching him as he worked, his face alight with passion. She never said a word, never revealed that she was watching. She simply observed, a silent observer of his creative process, a secret smile playing on her lips. The house, once filled only with silence, now had the quiet hum of creation, and she found herself strangely comforted by it. One afternoon, Leo left his door slightly ajar while he went to fetch some water. When he returned, he found Mrs. Gable standing in his room, gazing at his painting of the dilapidated barn. He froze, unsure of what to expect. Mrs. Gable didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, she spoke, her voice surprisingly steady. "The light," she said, pointing a gnarled finger at the canvas. "It's good, but it's not quite right. The light in the morning hits the barn differently. It's softer, warmer. Almost golden." Leo was taken aback. He'd expected criticism, but not this. This was insightful. This was the observation of a fellow artist. "You think so?" he asked, his heart skipping a beat. "I know so," Mrs. Gable replied, her eyes still fixed on the painting. "And the shadows, they're too harsh. They should be more subtle, more nuanced. Let the light do the work, not the darkness." Leo listened intently, absorbing every word. He realized that Mrs. Gable wasn't just being grumpy. She was genuinely offering her expertise. She still cared about art, even if she didn't paint anymore. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I appreciate that. I'll try to fix it." Mrs. Gable nodded curtly. "Don't try," she said. "See. Feel. Then paint." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Leo staring at his painting with new eyes. Her words were a turning point. He realized that Mrs. Gable wasn't just a grumpy widow. She was a kindred spirit, a fellow artist who had simply lost her way. And maybe, just maybe, they could help each other find their way back. The next morning, Leo woke up early and went outside to observe the barn in the morning light, just as Mrs. Gable had described. He saw what she meant, the golden glow, the softer shadows. He was eager to incorporate her feedback into his painting. Later that day, he hesitantly knocked on Mrs. Gable's door. "Mrs. Gable," he said, "would you mind, showing me how you would paint the light on the barn. To his surprise, Mrs. Gable didn't dismiss him. She simply nodded and said, "All right. Fetch your paints." Together, they went outside, Leo carrying his easel and Mrs. Gable leaning heavily on her walking stick. They set up near the barn, and Mrs. Gable began to instruct him, pointing out the subtle nuances of the light and shadow. She showed him how to mix the colors to create the perfect golden hue, how to use his brushstrokes to soften the edges of the shadows. Leo, in turn, shared some of his own techniques with her, showing her how to create texture and depth in his paintings. They talked about art, about color, about light and shadow. They laughed, they argued, they shared their ideas and their experiences. As they painted side by side, a remarkable thing happened. Mrs. Gable's grumpy demeanor began to fade away, replaced by a warmth and enthusiasm that Leo had never seen before. She smiled more, she talked more, and she even started to hum softly as she worked. Their collaboration was slowly bringing them closer, bridging the gap between their ages and their different experiences. They were two artists, united by their love of creating, finding solace and connection in each other's company. The silence in the house was slowly being replaced by the joyful sounds of shared creativity. One day, as they were painting the wildflowers in the garden, Leo had an idea. "Mrs. Gable," he said, "what if we painted something bigger? Something, together?" Mrs. Gable looked at him skeptically. "Bigger? Like what?" Leo gestured towards the dilapidated barn. "Like a mural. On the side of the barn. We could paint scenes from your life, your memories. A story told in pictures." Mrs. Gable was silent for a long time, considering the idea. Finally, a slow smile spread across her face. "A mural, eh?" she said. "Well, I suppose that old barn could use some sprucing up." And so, the project began. They spent days planning the mural, Mrs. Gable sharing stories from her past, Leo sketching the scenes and translating them into visual ideas. They gathered old photographs, using them as inspiration for their designs. They started with a scene of Mrs. Gable as a young girl, running through a field of sunflowers. Then came a scene of her wedding day, standing beside her husband beneath a blooming apple tree. They painted scenes of her children, her grandchildren, her life filled with love and laughter. The mural became a vibrant tapestry of Mrs. Gable's memories, a testament to a life well lived. Leo and Mrs. Gable worked tirelessly, side by side, painting each scene with love and care. The barn, once a symbol of neglect and decay, was transformed into a canvas of color and joy. As the mural grew, so did their bond, their collaboration becoming a true masterpiece of love and friendship. Each brushstroke was a shared memory, each color a testament to their growing connection. As the mural neared completion, people from the town began to notice. At first, they simply slowed down as they drove past, curious about the splash of color that had suddenly appeared on the old barn. Then, they started to stop, getting out of their cars to admire the artwork. Word spread quickly. People told their friends, their families, their neighbors. Soon, Mrs. Gable's farm became a local attraction. Cars lined the road, and people gathered in front of the barn, marveling at the vibrant scenes and the stories they told. The mural brought joy and color to the town, a much-needed dose of beauty in a world that often felt gray and dreary. It was a reminder of the importance of memories, of community, and of the power of art to bring people together. Children would point at the sunflowers, their faces lighting up with delight. Couples would hold hands, reminiscing about their own wedding days. Elderly residents would share stories of their youth, inspired by Mrs. Gable's memories. The town, once used to Mrs. Gable's reclusive nature, now saw her as a treasure, a keeper of stories and a source of inspiration. They brought her flowers, baked her pies, and offered their help with chores. Mrs. Gable, once a grumpy widow, found herself surrounded by warmth and affection. The mural had not only transformed her barn, but it had also transformed her life and the life of her community. It was a true masterpiece, not just of art, but of love and connection. The town had found a new landmark, and Mrs. Gable had found a new family. The change in Mrs. Gable was remarkable. The lines of worry and sadness that had etched themselves onto her face began to soften. Her eyes, once clouded with grief, sparkled with a newfound joy. She laughed more easily, her voice ringing with a warmth that had been absent for far too long. She started to attend town meetings, offering her opinions and sharing her stories. She joined the local gardening club, sharing her knowledge of flowers and plants. She even started baking again, filling the house with the delicious aroma of apple pies and cinnamon rolls. She rediscovered her love for art, not just in painting the mural, but in appreciating the beauty of the world around her. She would spend hours in her garden, sketching the flowers and admiring the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves. She even started painting again on her own, creating small watercolors of her favorite scenes. The mural had not only brought joy to the town, but it had also brought Mrs. Gable back to life. It had given her a purpose, a connection to her community, and a renewed appreciation for the beauty and wonder of the world. She was no longer the grumpy widow, isolated and alone. She was Mrs. Gable, the artist, the storyteller, the beloved member of the community. And she had Leo to thank for it all. He had not only cared for her house, but he had also cared for her heart, helping her to rediscover her love for life and art. He had given her a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. The attention the mural received didn't just stay local. A newspaper reporter, driving through the town, stopped to admire the artwork and wrote a story about it, highlighting the unlikely friendship between Leo and Mrs. Gable and the transformative power of their collaboration. The story went viral. People from all over the country were touched by their story, and many expressed interest in seeing Leo's other paintings. Suddenly, Leo's art was in demand. Galleries contacted him, offering him exhibitions. People commissioned him to paint portraits and landscapes. His paintings, once unwanted, were now celebrated. Leo's dream had finally come true. He was a successful artist, recognized for his talent and his passion. But more importantly, he had found a home and a purpose. He was no longer just a lost artist. He was part of a community, a friend to Mrs. Gable, and a source of joy and inspiration to others. He continued to live with Mrs. Gable, helping her with chores and spending his free time painting alongside her. He used his newfound success to improve her house, fixing the sagging porch and painting the peeling siding. He filled her garden with colorful flowers and made sure she had everything she needed. He had come to Mrs. Gable's house seeking a temporary solution to his financial problems, but he had found something much more valuable, a true friend, a creative partner, and a place to call home. He was grateful for the opportunity he had been given, and he knew that his success was due, in large part, to Mrs. Gable's unwavering support and her rediscovery of her own artistic spirit. They had found each other when they both needed it most, and together, they had created something truly special. The sun shone brightly on Mrs. Gable's farm, illuminating the vibrant colors of the mural. Leo and Mrs. Gable stood side by side, brushes in hand, adding the finishing touches to their masterpiece. They were painting a small detail on the scene of Mrs. Gable's wedding day, a tiny bluebird perched on the branch of the apple tree. Leo carefully mixed the perfect shade of blue, while Mrs. Gable steadied her hand, her eyes twinkling with joy. They worked in comfortable silence, their movements synchronized, their thoughts intertwined. The mural was more than just a painting, it was a testament to their friendship, their love, and their shared journey. As they stepped back to admire their work, a sense of completion washed over them. The mural was finished. Every scene, every color, every brushstroke told a story of a life well lived, a friendship forged in adversity, and the transformative power of art. Mrs. Gable turned to Leo, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "You brought the color back into my life." Leo smiled. "Thank you," he replied. "You gave me a home and a purpose." They stood together, hand in hand, gazing at their masterpiece, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The mural shone brightly, a beacon of hope and inspiration for the town and for all who came to see it. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, beauty and joy can be found, and that the most unlikely friendships can create the most extraordinary things. The masterpiece was complete, a testament to the enduring power of love and art.